Welcome, Uncommoners. This is Drew Cutcomb with Uncommon Entrepreneurs signing in live today with Bianca Amor Wakeford. We are out here in beautiful Mayahuez at a project she's working on, and we'll get into that during the call. Appreciate everybody who's signing in and so forth like that. Feel free to comment and leave notes and have questions. We'll be listening to that as we go through this and, be responding. We have David there in the notes that's going to be looking. So feel free. This is meant to be engaging. This is meant to be for you and for the community and so forth. This is a newer initiative that we're starting in which we're highlighting entrepreneurs that are successfully pivoting their businesses during this uncertain time, to say the least. And so our two speakers today, Bianca and Eric, will all have 30-minute time slots. So there'll be a few-minute commercial break at the end, and then we'll be jumping into Eric's interview and so forth like that. This is meant to be community driven and to give you value. So if you know of somebody that you want to, if you think you have a service or a message that would be useful to the community, we started Uncommon Entrepreneurs about a little over a year ago in San Juan, Puerto Rico, as a way for entrepreneurs to network together. That because of the tax incentive environment, because of just the beautiful beaches and the weather, and there's a lot of advantages that come with what Puerto Rico offers. And because of that, there's a really amazing ecosystem down here. And, because of that, we're going to be highlighting a lot of people as we go over in time. So today we're sitting here with Bianca, a friend. We've gone back a few months now and had some great interactions. So on today's Lunch and Learn, we're going to learn from Bianca Amor Wakeford, talking about the future of living and how to develop your own roadmap for a purpose-driven lifestyle. We're at Villa Vista in Mayahuez, which is a creative base camp for micro community experiment and one of her current design projects. Bianca is an island-born Filipino-Canadian entrepreneur who started her first business at 13 years old. She dropped out of high school to scale her chain of retail stores to 12 locations, 30 million in annual revenue, 150 plus employees, and offices in China and the Philippines before exiting at age 26. Today, Bianca is navigating the waters between purpose and product fit as a co-founder and chief experience officer at HomeBase, a local real estate technology startup. So welcome to the show, Bianca.
Thanks, Drew. It's nice to be here.
Yeah.
Getting some sun and some breeze.
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful, beautiful weather. So let's get into your background and starting kind of with your young entrepreneurial journey and so forth when you were in Canada. So maybe start us off by walking through that experience.
Yeah, well, so I started the business with my family at 13, and my parents are both entrepreneurs, and both actually farmers, one from the Philippines and one from Canada. And growing up, I had worked with them, and my sister and I had both worked with them very closely in their mail order business, which we ran from our home. So from our properties in our farm in Canada and our farm in Arizona, where we spent the winters, we actually ran our business out of our house. And when I was 13, we kind of made the switch from mail order, e-commerce before there was an E before it.
Got it.
We made the switch to retail, starting out in swap meets in Arizona, actually. And at 13, we sat down, had a conversation as a family saying, hey, if we're going to dive into this is what it's going to take.
Sure.
We're going to be quarter owners each. And do you want to do it? Yeah.
That's great.
And that was what I knew.
So how did that work? I mean, that's pretty impressive to scale. And I know you were on the road and you were flying a lot. Maybe what's some experiences you gained from it?
Oh, man. Exposure to the world, like before I turned 17, I was traveling back and forth between the US and Canada, especially doing trade shows in Vegas, trade shows in Chicago. When I was 17, started traveling to China in order to do our purchasing direct from factories there and to buy discounted items there, like factory closeouts. And by the time I was maybe 22, I was spending 4 months a year in China, 1 month each quarter. So back and forth.
Got it. Interesting. So as you said, you dropped out of high school, but you really stepped into a whole educational side of things of like real life experiences. You know, how looking back, I mean, everybody kind of has interesting choices right now. Would you have recommended that? What was that experience part?
You know, it wasn't as difficult of a decision actually as one might think. And part of the reason for that is that we were already early adopters of alternative education. And so when I started fifth grade, I actually started doing school online. And before then, I had been calling my teachers, you know, 6 months of the school year and going over homework. And so by the time I was 16, you know, I was only spending 3 hours a day on school. It was online. It wasn't nearly as interesting as what it was, you know, that I was doing in my everyday life. And I just had a conversation with myself that what is it that I want to do with my life and how am I spending my time now in order to achieve that goal? And what I wanted to do was build a business, was to find things that people love, to be
Yeah.
challenged every single day. And I just didn't see that the time I would be investing in school was really going to lead me where I wanted to be. Actually, the only career that I had interest in, you know, traditional career was actually being an architect. And that was the only reason, you know, for me to really consider, continuing to go to school.
Yeah.
Um, but then I realized, you know, what the first 10 years of being an architect was really like and decided that wasn't maybe for me.
A grind to get to the top. I
Yeah.
get it. So at 26, you come to the conclusion you're moving on. Kind of what was the motivation for the transition? What kind of like was the next steps kind of came here?
You know, it's just as we're talking about it, about 10 years from when I had raised myself the question that I wanted to do and now. And so when I was 26, I went to a university event that the Entrepreneurs Organization held in Penang, Malaysia. And I'd been part of the Entrepreneurs Organization for a few years by then, one of the youngest ever members. And had learned so many things about how to build businesses, what culture was, like these different ways of doing things that I wasn't learning in my own business, you know, where my mentors and where the people that supported me were my parents.
Sure.
And I remember when I got to Penang, and I didn't even know really what the topic of the university was, but I really loved Asia, and I hadn't been in Malaysia yet, so I was like, let's do it. My goal was to actually go to one university a year, and I realized, you know, at the first day there that the topic was social entrepreneurship. And I had never heard of this idea that the business that you were building was the business that could have the positive impact. Until then, my whole plan had been to work really hard for 15, you know, maybe 5 to 10 more years, walk out with, let's say, $20 million, and then do what I wanted to do to have an impact. So as soon as I realized that, oh my God, I can just live my purpose every single day. I can, you know, bring together small business, community, and sustainability, which are really my three things that I wanted to focus my life on. I could do that every single day. And for me, once I become aware of something, I can't not think about it every single moment. You know, at that moment, I couldn't go back to the way things were.
Yeah.
And my entire reality changed. And within 3 weeks, I had written a letter to my business partner, who was my dad, who I had just committed to another 5 years of building this business with, and said, here's what's happened. I don't know what to do. Here's some ideas of how to go about it. Like, you know, let's have this conversation. And I was faced at that moment with the possibility that my dad would never talk to me again.
Wow.
And my forum that I had flown back from Asia and gone to meet with, I said, "Hey guys, I have this problem. You know, I'd love to take your time during this day and a half that we're together.
Yeah.
And my end result is I want a letter that I can send and feel like I've communicated everything I need to communicate." And when I was asked that question, you know, are you okay with never speaking to this person that you've built this business with? You spent half of your life building this business, and the previous half of your life learning how to do that. And I didn't have a choice.
Interesting. Okay. So I guess it's a cliffhanger. What was the result? What
What was
happened?
the result? Oh,
How's the relationship?
Family business is complicated. And it was difficult, for a period of 3 months. We had a hard time having a conversation that wasn't around daily business operations. And, I think I really hurt his feelings. And at that point in time, my sister and my mom had both been out of the business for quite a few years. They'd already left, and it was just the two of us left. And a lot of the things that I had learned in the entrepreneurs organization and learned as I grew and found new mentors and started talking, I'd been trying to implement some of these changes with, my dad as my business partner. And, it had been a tough few years. We were doing really well as a business, but the personal relationship was really struggling. And it was really challenging. We couldn't really talk without a lawyer present. And so for 90 days, it was really challenging. I woke up every day not really knowing what was going to happen and knowing that I had made the right decision, but not seeing any evidence of that.
Until it played out.
Yeah. And eventually what happened is, we had a meeting, actually with our accountant, not with our lawyer. And I said, listen, there's 3 ways I think we can go about this. This is the one I prefer, but any of them will work for me. And honestly, just going in and showing that I had really thought through it, that I had thought through the different strategies, that I had an idea of how to make this work for both of us, I think was what flipped the switch and had him willing to work with me again,
That's amazing testimony. Okay, cool. So transitioning maybe some years, we're sitting here in sunny Puerto Rico. How did that kind of manifest? Like, what's Puerto Rico to you? How what brought you here?
It's definitely home, and I've been here for somewhere between like 18 and 24 months, and it's taken me, I think, a little bit of time to settle into that. Partly because since I left my business, I have been moving since then. I think that I haven't spent more than 12 months in one home, and taking time to build that has taken me time. But the last 6 years, I have been experimenting with some different businesses that interested me. At one point I started a personal growth retreat for women that were going through a transition, whether that was empty nesting or wanting to change a career or having some sort of loss. And I started a boutique retail store, did a subscription box business. One of the most fun things I did was I invested in and was essentially an extremely hands-on advisor and COO for a little biotech startup that was making transdermal patches with hemp and CBD. Hemp, CBD, and cannabis as well in Washington. And so spent a couple years, really getting to understand that industry, the cannabis and CBD industry, and understand hyper personalization, which I think is really like the magic for a product like hemp and CBD is that you can hyper personalize that. And then all of these different things for me were really experiments. I'm a very experimental person. And I experiment, I observe, I implement, and I just cycle through it.
Yeah, that's great because you're doing that to find your kind of niche. One area, so maybe to transition to talking about community, co-living, and kind of where HomeBase comes, where the project you're working on at the moment. Maybe starting with community, what does that mean to you? What is co-living? What is the significance of that?
Yeah, community, I think community is the container that holds people, that interact with each other. And growing up, my communities were my farm, the farm that we lived on, and our businesses, and to a much, much smaller extent, school. But only spending 2 months of the school year in class, I didn't really have a chance to build that community. So for me, building community or the search for community had been such a part of my life, feeling very secluded and kind of on my own.
Yeah.
And, at a time when the internet was becoming, not already here. So it really has been, such a focus of my life. And then co-living, co-living is an interesting subject because it's such a buzzword right now.
Yeah.
And but what my experience has been with it is when I moved to Puerto Rico, I moved in with my former husband and a couple of the people that he had been working with, and they had all moved from the States to Puerto Rico into a house, Templo, which some of you may know.
Yeah.
And it was an incubator for businesses. You know, we lived together, we worked together, we built businesses. 3 businesses really came out of that, and ours was one of them. And kind of how HomeBase came to be and how Villa Vista came to be really came from this idea of co-living, which is almost like, I think, a life incubator. You know, where we choose, I believe that where we choose to spend our time and who we use to spend our time with, and a lot of studies and really smart people back this up, like that's what shapes what you do. And for me, you know, for the last 2 years, I've intentionally chose to live with the people that I'm building businesses with. Because there are just some things that happen outside of the office, and, you know, those 2 a.m. conversations when you're all staying up thinking about the exact same thing and how to deal with it, like that's really where the magic happens.
Excellent. I know we'll be cycling through a couple video clips that I filmed earlier this morning of kind of this first one of her projects, the Villa Vista. And it's a beautiful place. I came in last night, and you know, it's roomy and relaxing and comfortable, and I can see where you're coming from, where it could be a place of, there's different nooks where you could be taking a call or reading a book or working on what you're working on, and kind of come together to whiteboard out ideas and come together around a dinner table at night and exchange ideas, exchange that flow, yet it's still a high level of limiting distractions and a high level of productivity with people that you're kind of building something with. Is that, I mean, feel free to elaborate, but is that kind of was the vision?
Absolutely, yeah. When we moved out of the house in Guaynabo, which is where this had all started, or the Puerto Rico journey had started for us, you know, I had a really good idea of exactly what kind of container we needed in order to best optimize our goals and what it was that we needed, and taking into consideration, you know, the fact that there was myself and my husband at the time, working together at the time as well, and then one of my co-founders, Steven, and my other co-founder, Ernesto, whose girlfriend and baby also lived with us.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of individual needs that as people that we had, you know, as individuals, as families, and also as business owners. And so, you know, there were only 5 properties on the island that were available that really fit my criteria. And it took us, you know, a month or so to kind of make that decision and jump in, but it has been life changing.
Amazing. So tell us a little bit more about like HomeBase and the vision and where you guys are heading with that, and how this maybe plays a role.
Yeah, well, so HomeBase kind of came to be as, you know, my company had moved here. We were working on a wearable technology product that we had been, you know, working on for quite a while, and honestly just couldn't find product market fit, especially for a hardware product that we needed to build. And the place that we could actually find the highest product market fit wasn't in alignment with my values.
Got it.
And we were like, if we're going to do this, you know, our customer is going to be these large companies in this industry. And the environmental impact was just something that I was like, I'm not if this is the business you want to build, I can't build this.
You weren't in ecology with it. It didn't line up with your values.
Yeah. And so we had last summer, my co-founders and I had a conversation and said, listen, what's important to us?
Yeah.
You know, we are looking for a magical moment. Like, our customers have to have a magical experience, because that means we had something special.
Yeah.
And so looking for that, with these being the things that we care about, what is it going to be? And the area we actually all overlapped on was education. You know, Ernesto having a son, me having a really complicated, I think, journey with education, and also understanding that it's such a critical piece of a community. I think that's one of the core foundations of a strong, thriving community is education.
Yeah.
You know, through the journey of that, we looked at some in-home daycare businesses, micro school startups, and did a couple MVP tests. Actually, we had done. We were part of Grupo Biancas enterprise program, which was really a great way for me to get to know the small business community here on the island. and also taught us a lot. And we did Y Combinator Startup School a couple times as well. And the thing we learned from that was to iterate quickly. Observe, experiment, implement, cycle through it fast. And so we, in the space of about 90 days, tested out a couple different business ideas around this idea of education. And there were other companies working in the space, some really well-funded companies in the US. And I still think the idea of alternative education, especially as is being proven right now, is part of the future. That is part of the future of living, is how do people go to school? But what we were finding, for building a technology startup, that can't be the only thing that matters, right? Sure. And so what we actually found is the common problem that all of these people had, whether it was the businesses, whether it was like an in-home daycare provider or a homeschool teacher or whatever it was, is that it's really hard to build a business out of your home.
Yeah.
There are a lot of rules and regulations that are unique per city, per state, per country. And it was one of the biggest challenges to growth that we heard from both these providers and from the people who had been working in the space for a couple of years. And so that was kind of the moment where we said, okay, maybe what we're looking at is how do we help people who, like us, are building a business out of their home? For us, we had to pay, at Temple, I think a full year's rent up front, here 6 months at a time. And that is just not an option that is available to most entrepreneurs. And so you may be able to start doing it and apologize later and get away with it for some period of time. But the landlord always has the right to not renew your lease, which is kind of what has been happening in some of these other in-home businesses. And so that's really where HomeBase was born, was taking a step back in the equation and saying, maybe this is where we can solve the problem. Yeah. Is in the home. And for me, I think that it also leads back to community. I think a lot of people don't want to rent their space out to somebody who's starting a business or to somebody who has kids coming in their home as part of their business because they don't understand them, they don't trust them. How do we know if you're going to succeed? And so that barrier between that barrier in the community, I think, is something that needs to be addressed overall. And that was really part of the experiment.
Nice. Excellent. Well, good. So just in kind of wrapping up, how could somebody find you? How does somebody do that?
Yeah, well, simplest thing, I guess, is Instagram. So we'll just share the link. It's at lucky_Kuneho, Kuneho, or just search Bianca Wakeford, I guess. And I have a link to Villa Vista if you want to check out what we're doing here. And then our startup HomeBase, we're essentially doing Airbnb, like a platform like Airbnb, the simplicity of using Airbnb for residential leasing.
Nice.
So virtual tours, you can submit your property online, you can sign the lease online, you can pay the rent online with an automatic subscription. It's just to really ease the flow between landlords and people who are renting. And that's at renthomebase.com.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, good. Appreciate you coming on and so forth, and feel free to check out what she's up to.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks, everyone.